right, well, today we are taking a step out of a galaxy far, far away and going on a journey to Middle Earth, and I am so excited about this journey. We're going to discuss arguably one of the greatest trilogies of all time, something that's very near and dear to Adam's heart and mind, Lord of the Rings. We're really excited to discuss these films today. We're joined by Michelle and Natalie from Force of Light. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And we're also
so
joined
glad you're
by my
back.
wife.
It's been a long time, right?
Yeah, it has been a while.
Yeah.
Collaborated.
Yeah.
And we're also joined by my wife, Brittany, from the Bosh blog. So thanks for joining us, Brittany.
Yeah.
She's been on the channel before, but never with me.
No, I know. I keep flaking on you.
This is true.
We're childless today, so it's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. My wife took ours with her too, so I'm here with just these two. And they're sleeping on the couch, so all's good here.
They're children too, so you know.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
So, Natalie and Michelle, you guys recently did your Lord of the Rings first watch, and I really enjoyed listening and watching those on YouTube. And it was kind of an inspiration for us to really go ahead and do this show too. Just because, I got back into Lord of the Rings recently, and we picked up the 4K of the Hobbit trilogy, and then the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well. So just a good time to go back and watch them again. But what were your, in case anybody missed those episodes, what were your overall thoughts of the trilogy, since it was your first time watching those movies?
Well, when we finished watching the first one, I was like, it was pretty entertaining, but I don't know if it's going to be my thing. And then as we went to record the next day and I began to talk about it, I was like, it hit both of us. Like, we like that more than we thought we did. And then we were invested.
There's more substance there, to chew on and think about that, is interesting.
Yes. And then as we kept watching the next two, by the time we end the second one, we're like, well, let's see what happens in the third one.
Now we're invested.
Yeah, we were invested. And by the time we finished it, we both, I think, genuinely have an appreciation for Lord of the Rings. And
for sure.
Just what a truly masterful storytelling that Tolkien did with this trilogy. And world building and the characters in it. I mean, even just watching it, I've still just seen it through one time. The one time we watched it for that series we did, but just some of the characters and things, just fantastic. And it's something I'll definitely watch again at some point. So really enjoyed it by the end of it.
As far as world building goes, I would say that there's nothing that equals Lord of the Rings as far as world building goes. This is something that Tolkien worked a good portion of his life on.
Created a language and everything. I mean,
and not just one, multiple languages.
Yeah, multiple.
Yeah, and thousands of years of history that he made on his own. This isn't something like Star Wars where, George Lucas, built that world. And then a lot of other people have jumped in and, kind of filled out some history and things like that. This is something that Tolkien took on his own and, for decades worked on this and built this world and built the history, built the languages, built everything about it. And it's just, Lord of the Rings for me, as far as world building goes, is far and away, hands down, number one.
Yeah, and I would say if you're a fan of this series of films and you're a fan of Tolkien, I would recommend going and watching. I
think it's called Tolkien.
It's called Tolkien, a film that actually kind of tells the story of his life and everything.
I'm actually in the middle of that right now.
Oh,
it's
okay.
on HBO Max, is I think where I'm watching it, and I'm almost halfway in. But it's kind of like he's still in college at the point I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell he's starting to get inspired, to kind of, and he is like a little girlfriend or somebody kind of, encouraging him to think of these things and use his imagination. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. So there's that you can check out too. And I'm going to turn to Brittany for a second here because Brittany, you've been did you finish the Hobbit?
I officially finished it.
Okay, so you were reading the Hobbit, and we went back and watched the Hobbit trilogy again, and now we're watching Lord of the Rings in 4K. What was your original reaction to the Lord of the Rings trilogy? Because I know you watched it a long time ago, and I don't know if you had a great reaction to it the first time. So,
You guys, when I read this question, I think I read it yesterday, I started laughing out loud, and I was like, I can't wait to answer this question. So this was so many years ago. I was watching it on VHS tape.
Same.
It was The Two Towers. I don't think I watched The Fellowship of the Ring at all. I think I had a VHS tape of The Two Towers for some unknown reason. And I'd put it on, and I was sitting in the living room downstairs. My grandparents were in the living room too. And I remember laying on the couch, and I basically fell asleep probably 20 minutes in. And that was it. I was like, I don't know. And then Josh and I got together. It was probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years after that. And I don't know. We literally watch it every year.
Yeah, I mean, at least once a year. It's like,
like
at least an annual thing we do.
Mhm.
Like Harry Potter and Star Wars, it's an annual thing. But I mean, I don't know. I like it a lot more than I think I did before. Definitely, I see a lot more. I mean, I liked it enough that I picked up The Hobbit and read it. And we have the Lord of the Rings books, and we were watching last night, I think, and I said, I don't know if I can pick up those books and read it. So
I was like, yeah, it'll take a while. It'll take a while.
Yeah, it's I've read them through a couple times. I love the books, but they're not an easy read. We'll put it that way. They're not an easy read.
I can see that being the case.
No one has crushed my reading goals for the year yet.
Yeah. So yeah, I understand that part of it for sure. Before we go further with this, I was watching some special features, talking about reading in the books, and Christopher Lee actually and I don't know how long he did this, because he lived to be in his 90s, but he read Lord of the Rings once a year, every year, annually, the whole thing. And he was, you talk about some of these actors that got involved in this series that were fans. He was a mega fan. Like he was, and it was really cool to see him in that role because he knew that role. He was just totally down for that. Christopher Lee is really cool to talk about in terms of Lord of the Rings because of how much of a fan he was just on his own.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that. And Adam, I'm coming for you next. I know you're a huge Lord of the Rings fan. What got you into these films / books? Like, what did you do first? Did you read them first? Watch them first?
No, I watched them first. I actually watched the Fellowship of the Ring with my high school girlfriend on VHS in her living room. I remember that clearly. It was a hot summer day and it was like 90 degrees in that room, but we sat and watched that 2.5-hour movie, and I was just hooked by the end of it. I really liked it. It wasn't something I was expecting to like. I wasn't really big into fantasy back then. I was very much into sci-fi, but fantasy just wasn't my thing. The knights and the hobbits and the elves, it just wasn't my thing. But after Fellowship, I was like, okay, I see what this is, and I was invested at that point. I started reading the books. I actually read, I would say between, I think it wasn't until after Two Towers when I started reading the books, because I know I definitely finished them before Return of the King came out. But yeah, so as far as getting started, though, it was the VHS of Fellowship of the Ring.
Awesome. For me personally, the first time I saw, and like you, Adam, this wasn't something I was expecting to really like, but I went to see it in the theater. I went to see Fellowship of the Ring in the theater with a couple of my friends, and I was blown away. I loved it the first time I saw it, and at the end with it's the way it ended. I'm like, really? What's going on here? Is there going to be another one? And of course I learned that it would be a trilogy and everything. And I remember watching Fellowship like so many times after that first time I saw it in theaters before The Two Towers. And I remember specifically in the theater, ready to watch The Two Towers, and just before it was starting, my legs were literally shaking. Like I was anticipating it so much. I was like so excited. My legs were shaking. I was just like so geared up for it. And that first scene in The Two Towers with Gandalf and everything, we're going to get into that in just a little bit, but that was I loved what I was seeing.
I'm not surprised by this.
So let's go ahead and dive a little deeper into the characters, moments, and quotes from each film. And of course, we're going to start with Fellowship. So let's go with Natalie and Michelle first. Tell us about maybe a standout character or two from Fellowship, and then we'll just kind of go around. Let's start with characters.
Well, I know, I think I could speak for both of us that the first character that really grabbed us and hooked us in would be Vigo.
Nah, really?
I had no idea. She's the same way.
As Aragorn. And
Hottie!
it wasn't really until he came on the screen that I really began to get interested. He grabbed our interest. He did. He grabbed it and kept it.
Brittany is understanding what we're throwing out there.
She gets it.
I have to
I get it. I mean, come on, I get it.
I was like, last night when we were watching The Two Towers, I was like, Brittany, I was like, he is so good looking in this movie, but he's not that.
Thank God he brought it up.
But I'm not ashamed to say it, but I'm like, but he's not as good looking in real life as he is in this movie. Like, what's up with that? And she's like, well, it might be the hair and the beard and stuff like that.
That's my type.
So, yeah, but yeah, he's a good looking character.
Yeah.
Fun fact about Vigo is he actually he was undecided about this movie, and his son was, because he had never read it, he wasn't familiar with it. His son though had read it, and his son was the one that was like, "Dad, you got to do it." And so knowing that his son was like fully on board is what kind of got him into the movie. So.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize. I looked it up. I guess he was actually like 40s when he did those movies.
He was.
I mean, he didn't look 40s, but he was a little older.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, it fits because Aragorn's like 80 or something like that. So.
That's true.
They lived so long.
Yeah,
according to the book, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I will say this before you guys move on. Each movie, a different character grabbed me. Like, he grabbed me in the first one, him, and probably Frodo being the lead kind of that movie.
Gandalf at times.
Yes, I didn't really but even after the first one, I was like, I'm going to need to see a little more out of Gandalf to understand this, and ultimately, I get it. So,
and in the second one, when he becomes Gandalf the White, I think it's like he kind of went to the next level.
He took that next step.
He transcended.
For sure.
Indeed.
But Aragorn is for Fellowship of the Rings.
And I love Sam.
But I didn't love Sam till the second one, so you're skipping ahead.
Okay, true.
I know. It's so hard. It's hard for me to he's like, at the end of Fellowship of the Rings, I'm like, shoot, what happened? Because I don't remember what happened, like where it stops and where it starts again, because it's so cohesive. It's like crazy.
Let's switch it up a little bit then. Let's stick with characters for now, and we'll go through all three of them and talk about the characters. But Adam, what about you for Fellowship? Is there a character that
I'm actually going to pass it to you guys, because I plan on filling in some stuff, because I know that I don't want to take anything. So I'm going to pass it to you and Brittany first.
Okay. So Brittany, I'll defer to you first.
Okay, so this was tough because I totally feel the same way about Aragorn, because I don't know. Oh,
reasons.
Reasons.
Yeah.
I'll be honest that I know we're doing favorite characters, and this is probably unpopular opinion, but Frodo's literally my least favorite character in the whole thing, and he's the best. The best one is when in the Fellowship is when I like him the best.
Yes.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm
poor Frodo.
Done with
I think it's just because our dog's name is Frodo, and Brittany is
taste.
Oh yeah. Speaking of how much I love Lord of the Rings, I named my dog Frodo, so there's that.
I was calling him before we brought him home, though, which was funny. But no, I feel like I picked Gandalf only because I feel like I relate to things that he says so much in there that I might have a different affinity for him because of The Hobbit and going through that. Even though I feel like he's more present in Lord of the Rings trilogy than The Hobbit.
Yeah, for sure he is. Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I just like him. I like grandpa figures.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
wizards.
I'm with you on that, Brittany. Gandalf absolutely was one of the standout characters for me. I was so like shocked when they were in the mines of Moria and he fell, and I thought, he's dead, he's gone. I was that really affected me. I love Gandalf's quotes in this film. We're going to get into that a little bit later. I mean, I think he's just so wise, and I love, him being that mentor character to Frodo. And it's kind of like that Obi-Wan Luke relationship. It reminds me of that a lot. So I absolutely love Gandalf and Aragorn, just because he's the kind of the reluctant hero. I always love reluctant heroes. Like Rey is a reluctant hero in Star Wars. I love that he's just he doesn't necessarily want to be the king. He doesn't want to be that leader. And sometimes, and it makes me think of like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones as well. Some of the best leaders sometimes are those that don't even want to be the leader.
Right.
So I love those characteristics. But and Adam, you just said you're gonna
Yeah.
fill in
So yeah, and I don't want to like steal anyone's thunder, but and this is kind of why I wanted to do this, because I knew Gandalf was going to get mentioned, I knew Frodo was going to get mentioned, and of course Aragorn. And then in the chat, we are live this week. This isn't something we've done for a while, but we are live on YouTube this week. I mentioned that for the podcast. But Luke from Hoth the Press, which we talked to last week, Luke is hanging out with us, and he said Gandalf is the GOAT. And Nicole Marie threw out Bilbo, and she gave us a quote: "Our greatest accomplishments happen outside of our comfort zone."
Love
So,
that.
knowing all of those characters that got mentioned, I just want to mention here, because, and I know other characters are going to get mentioned with, the next two movies, but Boromir won't,
He has
because
one good moment.
Boromir dies, but Boromir represents something so much bigger than kind of just the one character that dies. I mean, he's kind of all of us, I think, because he falls he falls into the temptation, he lets it overcome him. He learns in the end, for sure. But and we see him just a little bit in flashbacks in the next couple movies. But his story for me has always stuck out, because I feel like in a lot of ways that could be me, that kind of falls into that trap or that temptation and lets it consume him, when that's not who he is. He's not a bad person. He's not a bad character, but he lets that ring consume him. And so I want to toss him out there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I feel like he brings the human element to it,
Mhm.
which you don't necessarily want to see in a fantasy movie, But
because other than that, I mean, because as far as like who's actually just human, who's just a person in the story, other than Boromir, as far as the Fellowship is concerned, because other than that, Aragorn is part of the Dunedain. He's a chosen king. Actually descended as elvish blood, descended from elves. Who's actually the human in the story? And it has to be Boromir. I guess the hobbits would be the closest other than that, but I think for that reason, that's kind of what he's relatable in that sense.
I like it.
And he had that moment that launched a million memes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One does not simply.
Right. That guy.
So I'm going to go back to Natalie and Michelle again, and let's talk about, characters in the Two Towers that stood out, and in Return of the King. You can just, how the characters for you, like how you moved through the movies and different characters stood out. So just go ahead and talk about that.
Well, I want to start by saying my personal favorite is a little guy named Schmeagol.
She's just doing that because of me.
Totally kidding.
Not Gollum, but Schmeagol, is it? Or neither?
Well, I can say in the second one, because the movies kind of highlight certain characters more so than different ones do. And it was in the second one I really began to understand why people loved Gandalf. But I would have to say the second one is where Sam really became a beloved character to me, and like I truly loved him as a character.
Like we said in our thing, he's like the friend, like you are blessed if you have a Sam in your life. Like,
yes.
Like he has got Frodo's back. He is there till the very end. He is your ride or die chick.
He is. And it was so Sam, and then it was in the second one that I truly began to appreciate Gimli and Legolas, is that his name? Yeah.
Yeah, Lego, yeah.
And
they're funny. They kind of add like comedy.
And especially Gimli in the second one.
Yeah.
So I began to appreciate all them drastically in that one. And then by the time the third one came, Gandalf was just like awesome.
He was the boss.
He was the boss. And then you had him, and then it was Mary who kind of came in for the win for me at the last one, where he truly got. Am I thinking of Mary? Am I thinking the right one?
What's the other one's name? Like the
Pippin.
Pippin. It was Pippin. It was Pippin, because Pippin and Gandalf go together.
Pippin and Gandalf, yeah, they're in Gondor,
really
right?
Stood out to me in that one. And the third one is where, and I always get the two women's names confused, but where they're
very close names.
Éowyn.
Yes, like she has like the one moment in the movie that I truly like got excited for.
A very standout moment.
Yes, like to me, one of my favorite moments in the entire trilogy. Like made me, kind of had a response as I was watching it. So that's kind of I think we're kind of the same, I feel like, on that. But that was kind of my journey with these characters.
And you know what? To go back to your comment about Sam being the kind of friend that everybody needs. And I remember listening to your episode on Fellowship and talking about the relationship between Frodo and Sam, and them even like embracing at the end of that movie and, hugging it out and everything. And Tolkien's ability to show these relationships that men can have with each other, and it not being this thing that, that you'd be okay with having. I have those kind of relationships with my male friends. You know what I mean? Like we've always been very close and everything like that. And so I love that about these movies too.
Well, yeah, like I said in that, I mean, I think you know what I mean. Like, I don't mean that in a weird way, but I feel like maybe it's American society. Like, I think it's less so in Europe, maybe. But like, males should be able to be affectionate to each other and have that physical contact. And once again, I don't mean that in a weird way. I think you know what I'm saying. But just and I think now watching the movie about his life and seeing the close friendships he had, that probably played a part into like him making this like brotherhood of friends and being so close.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yeah. If you check out that Tolkien movie, you definitely see that for sure. Those friendships that he had. So, Brittany, what about for you as you went from like Two Towers to Return of the King? Which characters stood out in those movies?
I mean, I'm on the same with the girls. I mean, I feel like Sam, like I wrote down, so I did like my journal thing that's like really stupid. Like I've made a little hobbit hole. Which way do I gotta go? This way?
That way, it's backwards.
So
nice.
That's my nerdum coming in. So I put on here, I put Sam, and I go, "Dear Sam, the best friend Frodo didn't deserve."
Yeah,
you're really hard on Frodo. I have to say,
I do think
he's wearing this ring.
That's what I was just getting at. Like I feel like that ring.
It's corrupting his heart.
No, these are water, and like the Horcrux that he's wearing in like I don't know, the last two. Maybe last one. Like I felt like it did the same thing to Frodo, and I don't know. That irritates me.
Yeah.
Whatever. At least he understands it at the end. He's like, Sam, I love you. But I also love Legolas and Gimli. Like I can't handle my life with them, and I think that they're so awesome. And I wrote down here, they have a love-hate / rivalry that blossoms in this movie. That is because they hate each other in the first one. Like
it's a very.
deep
I mean,
rooted.
no, I mean it's a racial thing. You know, there's no
Yeah,
doubt
yeah.
it
Talk
touches
about what we're
on
things that
racism.
are going
Yeah,
on today. You know, that you can
Yeah.
relate to those types of things.
But I think that directly ties back to when, in The Hobbit too, when the elves kind of turn their back on the dwarves.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah. It's a historical thing, and there's bad blood between the elves and the dwarves, and then they grow together and they become not just
Buddies.
really just exactly best friends. You know, the books, just like the movies, have appendices, and you can actually read in the appendices that they continue that friendship for years and years and years after. So it's really kind of cool to see where these characters end up even after the story, and they maintain that bond. So
Yeah, I think it just goes to show you that, even people who think they're complete opposites, like couldn't possibly get along, like, come from different places, different races, whatever that tension is, that if you actually, give that person a chance and get to know them, you might find that you have more in common than you don't have in common, and can form that kind of relationship with somebody. So I think it's an important life lesson, for sure.
That's all I got.
And again, I'm with you, Brittany. I mean, I think for the Two Towers, Legolas and Gimli were my standouts. That relationship that forms, the humor, the competition, I think it was all great with those two characters for me in Two Towers. And then Return of the King, I got to go with Sam. I think for me, Sam really was able to shine in Return of the King even more so maybe than the Two Towers, because he went through so much in Return of the King. I mean, Frodo told him to go home, basically leave, get out of here. That moment is heart wrenching. And
I
at the end,
since I wasn't going to even mention that moment, but now that you brought it up, it's fair game.
Do you have more to say about that moment?
I hate that moment.
Yeah,
I hate that moment.
It's terrible.
I hate that moment because it shouldn't have been in the movie. I've had thoughts about that. It's weird, and I know we're going to get to favorite movies because I love Return of the King, but that particular moment, I hate that moment because it's, we talked earlier about the friendship, and that's something. I'll preface this. I'll preface it with this. I'm not one that likes to harp on differences between books and movies.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a little bit about Harry Potter, and I absolutely love the Harry Potter movies. Everything that they did with all 8 of those movies, as separate from the books as they were, I think they were perfect. But that particular moment in Return of the King didn't have to be there, and for me, it kind of went back on that theme of friendship, because in the book, the friendship is what got both of them through that time, and they get separated for different reasons at that point in the story. But Sam was never sent home, and I prefer that interpretation of it way more than I prefer what happened on screen.
See, I didn't know that, and that was kind of a really heartbreaking scene.
Yeah.
So it's like, why did they add that?
Yeah.
I would imagine it's a more dramatic element to separate them than in the books they do get separated, like I said, but it happens a little differently, and they still meet up again in the tower, but it's a more dramatic way to do that, I guess. So
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in the movie, Sam has to deal with that. He carries Frodo basically at the end, and he just everything that he went through, and he gets a real moment to shine with Shelob and everything, which I'll probably talk about a little bit and a little bit more. But yeah, I just love Sam in Return of the King, and I actually, my buddies and I were kind of placing bets about who's gonna throw the ring in the fire, who's gonna do it. And for the longest time, I was like, I want Sam to do it. I want Sam to be the one that that does that. He's definitely involved at the end, but yeah, I just love Sam. So that's mine. Adam,
I forgot to do a Return of the King when you did that.
Oh, yeah, the characters or
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So Sam, yeah.
Sam.
I put Aragon on. What is it? Aragon or Aragorn?
Gorn
I don't
with an
know.
R.
Gorn.
Aragorn.
And obviously I did Eowyn because, girl power.
Because girl power.
But I love that, like, Tolkien, even in that time period where I don't even think, like, when he wrote this, women had basically very many rights at that point in time. But when did he write these, Adam? It was like in the hundreds.
They were published in the 50s.
Okay.
50s. Mm-hmm.
But he was alive way earlier than that, wasn't he?
Oh yeah. I mean, and he really started working on kind of the whole Middle Earth thing, like around World War I-ish.
Yeah, that's
he
what
started
I thought.
kind of working on Silmarillion stuff around that time. So
yeah, so having that idea that a woman above all defeats this undefeatable dude is just like, I don't know, that isn't their time period,
It was so ahead of his time.
But it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
And Eowyn as a character is awesome for that, because she has this need. She wants to be part of this fight. She's something she believes in, and she gets herself there no matter what.
I like her.
And she takes Mary with her, and I loved that.
Yeah,
kind of like, I'm gonna swoop you up, and don't worry, I'll take care of you too. And he gets a piece of the action.
Yeah, for sure. Adam, did you have any standout characters from Two Towers: Return of the King that maybe we didn't talk about?
I'll mention Gollum / Smeagol, because the Two Towers I think is really his movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And you really get a lot more depth to him in. Definitely in Two Towers, but then you also get the little flashback scene at the beginning of Return of the King, which is very. I love that they included that little flashback, but it's a very intense way to start that movie. But seeing the dual personality that he fights with in Two Towers, it just adds another element of tragedy for me to that to Smeagol, as a character, that fight between Smeagol and Gollum, and who comes out in that fight. It's just it's tragic, not only because of what happens to him at the end, but it's tragic because of what he goes through for the rest of his life after he finds that ring. So other honorable mention characters. I really enjoy Theoden as a character, and I see Luke is actually mentioning Theoden there as well, being healed by Gandalf. And Luke's actually saying that it's a scene that he was moved to tears for. Perfect. That's a beautiful scene where Saruman is driven out of Theoden, and seeing everything that Theoden has missed. It's almost like this. And I don't want to compare this to things too much, but it's almost like this thing that speaks to addiction, or coming out of an addiction or something like that. Where you realize everything you've missed, and he's missed the death of his son. He's missed all this other stuff, and he's coming back to this world, and picking up where he left off. It's a really beautiful moment, like Luke said, but then Theoden becomes this really interesting character, especially in Return of the King, where he also deals with some prejudices as well, almost leading to the death of his people. If others weren't there, if Aragorn and Gandalf weren't there to actually do that, that could have been the end of him and his people. So it's really interesting stuff there with Theoden. So I'll mention Theoden.
Awesome.
He was a really good character, and I kind of had forgotten him until you brought him up. And you're right, that is a beautiful / powerful scene.
Yeah.
It's almost like someone that's whether mentally or sick with sin. I mean, whatever we want to call it, and then it's like he's made whole, and
really
he's back
treat it
in
like
his right mind, and his physical appearance changes. So it's kind of a beautiful transformation to watch.
They really treat it like a possession almost. They do
definitely. Like it was cast out,
right?
And and then I kind of used him as an example versus the other king that was like ate all the gross stuff, like dripping
And
down
she's
his
talking about,
face.
in the last one.
Denethor.
I hate
He-
that scene.
I know.
Oh, it's so gross.
He's so gross and unlikable,
But-
which I mean, I guess that was the
point.
intention.
Yeah,
But,
that
you know,
really is. Yeah, and John Noble just killed that role. He was
Yeah, he did.
so good in that role.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he made you really dislike him.
He's
Yeah.
so good at being bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, he ended up being, in my opinion, a very good, a great king. And what an example of a great leader is, like out there with his people in the front, like we're going to do this together, and gives his life,
And
for
you're
the
talking
cause.
just
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you're talking Theoden there, not Denethor, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Theoden.
okay.
And then the other guy, I'm bad with these names, but he's inside the walls of his castle.
Denethor,
Eating
yeah,
his-
right.
Eating his
Yeah.
food.
So it's just kind of the difference between a good
There's that
leader
contrast of
not
those two
one.
characters. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Absolutely. So why don't we move on to our favorite moments from the trilogy, and let's start with Fellowship, and we'll just kind of go around and talk about some of our a favorite moment or two from Fellowship of the Ring, and let's start with Michelle and Natalie again.
Well, I'm trying. Oh, I know. I actually do have a favorite moment, and it's not Vigo. So, even though his arrival's pretty big, good.
Shocker.
But it's one of my favorite scenes in the trilogy, and I understand. I guess it wasn't actually in the book this way. But when Liv Tyler's character shows up and she puts Frodo on her horse, and just the pictures, the scenery they got of her riding fast through this beautiful scenery on this white horse with those like 4 or 5 like dark like henchmen following her on the horse, that chase. That was like my favorite scene in that movie for sure. One of my favorite scenes in the trilogy, really.
I have such short-term memory. It's almost like I love to watch things and then do discussion because of how short. But now that you bring that up, not to copy you, but I think when we discussed it after we watched it, that is a beautiful scene and almost like imagery
Yes.
of like light and purity and and the dark behind them.
Yeah. Adam, what about you? You have a favorite moment?
I don't think
scene?
anyone's gonna take this one, so yeah,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and say it now. But I love as they're leaving Rivendell, Frodo's taking up this burden. He's volunteered himself to take this ring to Mordor, but he doesn't know if it's left or right, and he has to ask, which way is Mordor, and he has Gandalf behind him to help him, and that's such a beautiful moment, because he's taking up this burden, but he's still kind of leaning on Gandalf behind him to help him along, and asking for guidance and asking for which way do I go, and it's a beautiful symbolic moment for me.
So Adam, that was in the extended edition, right?
Possibly.
Yeah,
I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't have either unless we went back.
It possibly is extended,
watch
but
the
I
theatrical,
honestly
yeah.
couldn't tell you.
But I think that something that piggybacks off of that is there is a part in the theatrical version where Frodo, like they're all arguing in Rivendell about who's going to take it, and Frodo's like, I will do it. And then he's like said it a couple times and
It's
he's like, I will do it, but I do not
know the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
seeing that vulnerability like in him and knowing, I mean,
But then they mentioned that moment, and I have to mention another part of that moment where after he says that, Gandalf's face just falls, and
Yes.
it's, the way Ian McKellen played that was, again, beautiful, but just his face falls because he knows what that means,
Yeah,
and what his fate might be, and just I think it's another example of hobbits just surpassing his expectations.
every time.
And coming back to that theme of even the smallest people can make a difference.
Yes.
That type
Can
of
change the course of history or something like that. Yeah.
So Britt, what about you? A favorite moment from Fellowship?
Favorite moment. It's hard to pick a moment. I think a lot of times, and I always go back to this on the Hobbit movies too, but I think like if we're just strictly thinking about like what Natalie and Michelle said, like imagery and everything like that, there's that part where they're in the Moria. Is that right?
Yes.
And like there's a callback to what's his name? Like the part where they're fighting the goblins that are down there, or are they orcs at that point? Or they're
They're
goblins?
goblins. Yeah. Are you talking about Balin?
Yeah, so they
Yeah.
call back Balin, who was in like the original Hobbits and the Hobbit movies, and then like that whole portion of that movie I really enjoy, like from the time that they get to the gate and
Yeah.
Frodo's like, it's a riddle, Gandalf, like duh. And he's like, what's friend in Elvish? And then it opens. And then like
I think the whole Moria portion of Fellowship is my favorite
yeah, I
part
agree.
of the whole film for me personally.
Yeah. And then
But
like the Pippin and Mary, like I don't know which one it was, whichever one's the toque, throws the
Pippin.
Pippin, yeah.
Pippin knocks the thing in the thing, and Gandalf is like full of a toque, and I'm like, like laughing.
Yeah.
And then
He can be a fool.
yeah.
But an honest fool.
And then once they get out of there and they start going down, and they're like, we have to go to the bridge, and they start going down those stairs, and like the camera like does a wide angle, like pulls out. You just see them diving deeper and deeper and deeper into the caves. Like I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
It's like so creepy, and like they're going into their doom.
Yeah,
but they're not.
And for me, I mean, I think in particular, I love the conversation that happens between Frodo and Gandalf about him having the ring and him wishing that it never would have happened. And Gandalf has these just powerful quotes, you know, like, so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. And, you know, we'll get into the quotes in a minute here, but I love that conversation between Frodo and Gandalf. And it really sets the stage for the whole trilogy, and Gollum's involvement and the power of the ring and what it's going to do to Frodo and everything. But he has a choice, you know, to make about what he's going to do with the time he has. So I just love that scene. You know, it's probably my favorite scene from. I mean, of course, I love the action in Moria. I love the action in towards the end when Legolas is just lighting dudes up with arrows left and right. Like I love all that stuff. Like that's cool stuff. But I love that moment between Frodo and Gandalf. Adam, you already mentioned yours, right? So
yeah.
Let's move on to the Two Towers and talk about a favorite moment from that. And let's go with Adam. Why don't you start this one? You've been towards the end for most of these. So.
Are we doing favorite moment from Two Towers?
Two Towers, yeah.
So I think it's so hard. I was watching these movies all week this week, and I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down and pick out my favorite moments, and it's like moment after moment after moment after moment. Like it's I don't know. I don't think anyone's going to mention this. I really enjoy the Treebeard stuff with Pippin and Merry because
I agree.
It's comical. It's another one of those moments, like you mentioned, the speak friend and enter. But I mean, Tolkien was a linguist, all right, so he has this background where he likes to play with words. You know, he creates these languages, and then he likes to play with words. And you don't see a lot of the playing on word stuff in Lord of the Rings as much as you do in The Hobbit. You know, there's a lot of funny little play on words things that he does with The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Treebeard is one of the ones that, you know, he is where he's kind of playing around with that a little bit, and that's so fun to see on screen. There's a lot more fun things in the extended editions where where you see Pippin and Merry drinking drinking the water from Treebeard's, I don't know what you would call it, home or whatever it is in the forest, but and then that's they start to grow because it's so rich, and so that they actually get taller as they're visiting Treebeard, and then they start arguing about which one's taller and all that stuff. But I just really like that whole thing, you know. And again, it's one of those things that speaks to dragging your feet, hesitating in times where you need to show some type of action, and you know, that's really kind of what Treebeard's there for, I think. But it's a lot of fun. It's a different speed for that point in the movie. It's a nice kind of way to offset what's happening with Helm's Deep and all that other stuff. But yeah, I think I'll go with the Treebeard stuff.
Awesome. Michelle and Natalie, what about you guys?
I'm like trying to remember the scenes from
Well,
the second one. It's
I'll
been a
say,
few
I
weeks.
know we discussed this one, so I know, well, you just probably agree with me on this one. The second one, the moment that stands out to me is where Aragorn and Gimli at the end at the final battle, and Gimli's like, "Throw me over." He's like, "But don't tell anybody." He's like, "It never," or something.
He's like, not a word.
Yeah, not a word. He just throws it over
Because he's so prideful about the fact, like, I'm a macho man, even though I'm shorter.
Yeah.
I have to go with that comical moment. And then two, even before the battle begins, and Gimli like makes a comment about like not being able to see because like he literally
He's like,
comes
could
up
we
to
not
here.
have picked a better spot?
Yeah, yeah.
So I have to go with that moment, just the humorous moment.
Awesome. Brittany, what about you?
I mean, I definitely agree. Like Gimli and Legolas's moments together. That one that you guys are talking about, I wrote it down, and Legolas was like, "Shall I describe it to you, or would you like me to find you a box?" And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh,
Their banter is just so good.
it's perfect.
Yeah.
It is a perfect thing."
The growth of them is just is so well done, and then, even Gimli, toss me, just because it plays back to the first one, and no one tosses a
No one
dwarf.
tosses the dwarf.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no one tosses a dwarf.
Yeah, but just seeing how they've grown and how they change through the movies is so much fun.
Yeah, for me, The Two Towers was really a tough one for me to pick a moment because for me, there's so many moments in this film that I love so much. I mean, earlier I mentioned the opening scene, the continuation of what happened to Gandalf. I just loved seeing that. It kind of the camera dives down and follows Gandalf going down into that chasm, and they just keep going lower and lower. And that whole scene just blew my mind. Like, because that's the thing I wanted to know the most going into The Two Towers was what happened to Gandalf. So I love that scene, but I also have to say that Helm's Deep, I think, is the best battle put to film, in my opinion, because of the layers of that battle. It's not just a bunch of swords hitting swords, and there's layers to this battle. They show like first of all, there's a big lead up to this battle. There's all this build up to this moment, and then the rain starts falling, and then they get the Uruk-hai get the ladders out, and they start climbing the walls, and there's just different layers to it. Then they blow up the wall, and there's that layer to the battle, and then they go into the keep, and there's kind of that aspect of the battle, and then at the end, Gandalf comes in at the last minute to save the day with the Rohirrim. So, man, that moment with Gandalf coming in at the end to save the day at the last moment. I always forget that Gandalf is out there. Like, I always forget that he's going to come back. Every time I watch it, I'm like, and then he just shows up. And so for me, that's my favorite moment from Two Towers. So let's move on to Return of the King. Favorite moments from Return of the King. And Brittany, let's start with you on this one.
Favorite moments? So this one's really foggy in my mind because we haven't watched this one in a while. So I basically had to use the internet. I mean, okay, so I think obviously the moment with Eowyn, and who was that she killed? Was that Saruman? Or who was that?
It was
Eowyn was the Witch
the
King.
Witch King.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously that's like number one moment of everything. But I also put I also wrote down on here where Aragorn finally gives in to the fact that he is the king and a darn good one.
Yeah.
Like I just felt like, I don't know, like, and I know like basically the story's about Frodo and getting the ring and destroying it and whatever, but like Aragorn's story is just like you said earlier, the reluctant leader, and I don't know, it's just finally coming to terms with who you really are and what you're called to do. And even though he was like fighting the whole time, it's like, what are you fighting for if you're not fighting to be king, dude? You know?
Yeah.
I thought that was just like the ultimate payoff at the end for me.
Absolutely. Michelle and Natalie, favorite moment from Return of the King?
I mean, I think we
Oh.
both have to go with her moment.
Yeah, well, her moment was great, but I will say, yes, I love that moment. For me, there's like several. That's probably the most memorable movie in my mind, as far as like there's like a handful I could name, but I'll go with the one that kind of evoked the most emotion out of me, which was
Oh, I know.
yeah, she knows. When Aragorn is king and Liv Tyler comes and the hobbits, the four hobbits, they kneel down before Aragorn and he says, no, you kneel to nobody or to no one.
That's fantastic.
I love that one too.
And it literally it made me tear up, and it kind of made me think, like I said in our discussion, like almost like the least of these, or it is the greatest among you sometimes, or in some situations, and it's like tiny but mighty, and sometimes the most seemingly unqualified or disqualified, it's like it was just who could do the job, the people that nobody thought, oh well, they'll be the ones that get it done, but these little guys were.
Yeah, I definitely cry every time I watch that scene. No doubt about it.
That and then you and I both really laughed between when they're going in to see that king and Gandalf tells Pippin,
oh, we really laughed
like
at that.
just let me speak. Or
it was the way he delivered it, because he's like, don't say much, or no, he's like, don't bring up the death of a son.
Yeah.
And actually, don't do this, and actually just don't speak. And then of course, as soon as he gets in there, he's like, I humbly offer you and he's like, oh,
Pledge my life to you.
Like, and let me know if I'm pretty sure this is Return of the King. So clearly I have a thing for like the visuals they got with the horse riding through this beautiful scenery. But like Gandalf kind of leads the battle in the beginning, like on the white horse, and that's just like an amazing visual for some reason. Like him all in his white on the white horse, like leading the charge. It's just like a really cool visual from that movie.
Yeah, and for me to kind of go along with that, I love when Gandalf and Pippin are riding into Minas Tirith and they're going up all the levels and they get to the top, and just the music, the score, and man, I'm glad I mentioned the score right now, because it would be a mistake to not mention it. Howard Shore, his score of this trilogy is amazing. I listen to it still all the time. I love the music. But, just that ride to the top of Minas Tirith is actually one of my favorite moments. But yeah, I'll go. Let's go with Adam. I kind of jumped in there. So Adam, you want to give your favorite moment from Return of the King?
Yeah, it's when it was over, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Because I love how much time they took at the end to wrap everything up. I love that the scene with Bilbo and Gandalf go away, but then Frodo goes away also. That's the scene where I tear up every time I watch it. I love that Sam got his happy ending. I just love that they took that time to wrap everything up. And I know some people actually criticize that because it does seem to go on for a long time, but I loved it. I sit there and I every time I watch it, I'm so happy that they took that much time to wrap everything up.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, and I don't know if there's anything additional in the extended edition to the ending, but I think they in the theatrical release, they pretty much left at least almost everything in the ending and gave it that time, like you said. Yeah. Brittany.
I already went.
You already went. Yeah. I kind of went, I talked about the ride to the top of Minas Tirith. I love Sam shining in with Shelob, which I mentioned earlier, and it was just kind of, he just defeated that spider, and it was awesome. And everything he does for Frodo in that film. Again, it's another one of those movies that's really hard for me to pick a favorite moment. I love the moments at the end that you guys already mentioned. You bow to no one. Those types of moments it's just filled with them. So yeah, I mean, those would be mine. And I think now we're ready to talk about some quotes, some of our favorite quotes. So there's a lot of good ones in this trilogy. So let's start with Natalie and Michelle. And, if you had a favorite quote from Fellowship, or or the Two Towers of Return of the King. It doesn't have to be in order necessarily, but yeah.
Well, I think we've already mentioned some of mine. I know you mentioned the one between Gandalf and Frodo. Their little discussion about like it's kind of just basically just like it's what we do with our time that matters.
Yeah.
And then I love the one what is it that
I know there are so many that jumped out at me over the 3 movies, but having only viewed all of them one time, it's like they don't come to my mind very easily.
Well, and somehow I guess I missed this in the movies, but when we were doing stuff for ours, I looked it up. But Gimli, I just love it as far as now that I've looked it up. Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens. That's just a powerful quote.
That's really good.
Yeah, and then even the one, I mean, and in the movie, I mean, how do you not like when Sam like says, "I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you"? I mean, that's just kind of like,
that's a
moment.
tearjerker.
Yeah, that's just a great thing. But as far as quotes, yeah, the one with Gandalf and Frodo, and then also, what is her name? Cate Blanchett. She's the one who says,
Galadriel.
Okay, she's the one who talks about that sometime, where is it? Basically, like kind of sometimes the smallest people can change the course of history or whatever she says there.
Yeah.
Clearly, we've only seen it one time. We would remember more if we.
Well, hey, I mean, your knowledge is pretty good considering you've only seen it once. I mean, there's a lot of characters. There's a lot to this story. It's a lot to take in just one viewing.
There's a lot of substance, and because it is fantasy, it's like you've got names, places, like kingdoms. Like there's just a lot going on, to take in, like you said.
Yeah. Adam, what about you? Did you have some favorite quotes?
There's so many, but I always, and since I'm thinking of Return of the King, I love in Return of the King where Gandalf and is talking to Pippin about death, and Pippin is and I had the quote pulled up, but I closed it. He's more or less describing death to Pippin, and he talks about the curtain rolling back, and you see these fields of green and a swift sunrise and all this, and Pippin just says that doesn't sound too bad, and Gandalf says no, it's not. And it's just such a beautiful quote and a beautiful way to put Pippin's fears to rest. And it was it's one of those, I get chills right now just talking about it, but I love that part of the movie. So for me, that quote stands out for sure.
I think it can be comforting for anybody, really, to hear those words, for sure. Britt.
Okay. I don't for Fellowship of the Ring, I have a handful, but they're all related except for one of them. So I love a lot of these quotes are from Gandalf, but they're not the typical ones. They're all ones that I literally use in my everyday life, which is embarrassing but hilarious. So the one is right from the beginning where he's like, a wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to. And it's we are always late to everything.
I was gonna say that's
true.
my motto.
Don't encourage her.
It's typical. And then you shall not pass. It's such a weird, obviously it fits in the movie, but it's such a weird, I say this a lot in a weird, or maybe I think it and don't say it out loud because he quotes all the movies and I just you're weird. But anyway, when I'm driving, I'll hear that in my head, you shall not pass.
like when somebody's trying to pass you on the highway, and you're like, you shall not pass.
It's shut up. And then I say fly, you fools, a lot.
You do. You do say that.
One comes out of my mouth.
Yeah.
When we're watching other movies, they'll be running and I'll go, fly,
you fools.
It's so weird. Yeah. But then the other one, and again, this probably goes back to my love I love Bilbo. I love him. But that one quote right at the beginning where he said his party, and he's like, I don't know half of you as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you, half as well as I should,
Half as well as you deserve.
or half as well as you deserve. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Or
another
like
one of those
Proud.
moments where he's playing with words, where Tolkien's playing with words. And
Yeah.
that's the proud feet and the proud foots, and
Proud, yeah.
Proud
Mhm.
boots.
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's like, I don't know. I sometimes wish that I had the guts to actually say that out loud, and I'm proud of Bilbo for actually saying that, and nobody understood what he said, which was great.
Yeah.
And then the other one that really stood out was in Two Towers. So like Sam, it's always Sam, and Frodo are like they're going through, and Frodo looks at Sam and he's like, I can't do this. Like I can't do this anymore. And Sam is like, I know, and I mean, by rights, we should all be dead at this point. You know, we shouldn't even have made it this far. But
Mhm.
like, I'm going back and thinking about the stories that we've been told and how all those people had the opportunities to quit and they never did. And maybe we'll be one of those stories at some point or whatever. And
Yeah,
then,
I love that whole conversation he has with Frodo about that.
yeah, and
Mhm.
like the best part was at the end, and Frodo's like, how do you keep going, Sam? Like, what does he say specifically? What are we holding on to, Sam? And Sam says, there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for.
Yeah,
And it's like,
that's a great quote.
that's so relatable right now
Mhm.
in our time,
Mhm.
that it's just like, yeah, all this crap is crap,
Yeah.
but there's some good. There's still some good here that
And it's
we need
worth
to fight
fighting for. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any from Return of the King? Or?
I do have, obviously the one I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. I thought
Yeah.
that was really
Yep.
good.
Mhm.
But then there's this one from Gimli where I think that they're at the gates of not Isengard. What is it? They're at the,
Mordor.
yeah,
Mhm,
Mordor.
the
They're-
Black Gate.
Yeah, they're at the Black Gate. And Gimli's like, he's like all geared up, ready to fight. And he's like, certainty of death, small chance of success. What are you waiting for?
That was funny. I'd forgotten that.
It's like the story of their lives at this point.
Mhm. For sure. Yeah. Is that all?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So my favorite quotes with Fellowship, it would be, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. I try to live my life by that quote. I mean, it's always had a big impact on me for sure. I also like when Gandalf kind of mentions, and he says to Frodo's talking about Bilbo, he should have killed Gollum while he had the chance. And Gandalf responds by saying, many who live deserve death and many who die deserve life. And he says, can you give it to them, Frodo? And just judging who should be alive and who shouldn't be. And I just
be
love.
too eager to deal out death and judgment.
Yeah,
Even the
yeah.
very wise cannot see at all ends.
Exactly.
Right. Absolutely.
And from the Two Towers, this is a very simple one. And Aragorn says this one to a young boy as they're getting ready for battle. And there's this young boy who is trying to kind of testing out his sword and, saying the men have kind of given up hope. And Aragorn just says, there is always hope. He just said, there's always hope. So I think that's something I always keep in my mind too. That no matter what, there's always hope. And Return of the King, you guys mentioned them, my friends, you bow to no one. I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you. But one of the ones that stood out to me was when Gandalf says at the end, as Frodo's about to sail away to the Grey Havens, and Gandalf says, I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are an evil. I absolutely love that quote because, sometimes you're not just crying because something's sad,
Oh yeah.
and it's not, tears aren't evil, it's, and even with our culture and with men, I'm very open about the fact that I cry and that movies and shows make me cry. And I think it's something that is okay to do and it's okay to talk about. And I just love that quote. So yeah, those would be my favorite quotes. But yeah. So that was really awesome, just going through all those moments and characters and quotes. And I guess my next question is, if you had to pick a favorite film from this trilogy, which one would it be? So let's go with Michelle and Natalie.
Natalie, you want to go?
I have to say, I know a lot of people, I guess, think that The Two Towers is actually a better movie, but I have to go with Return of the King.
Hmm.
Just kind of everything comes full circle.
I'm still like, I feel like I would need to see them all again to make that truly assessment because
True. I mean, I've just seen them once.
like, I can't decide if I think, but I'm almost between Fellowship or Return of the King. So I'm not decided at this moment. But Return of the King, I was like the most excited to see how does it conclude? It's kind of like those deals. So I'm not really sure.
I mean, I have a hard time really reviewing a movie or deciding where it stands in my list unless I've seen it at least twice. So I can definitely understand that. Brittany, what about you if you had to pick a favorite?
I told you this the other day. Like with no hesitation, really, it was Fellowship.
Fellowship. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, maybe after we finish watching these again, I might change that. But
Fellowship is a beautiful movie, though.
I think
Mhm.
that's what it's like. I don't know. I always like the first ones in a series. Like Josh always wants to skip the first couple movies of Harry Potter because it doesn't get good until like number 3.
I'm a big middle chapter person for some reason.
And I'm like, I like how they start building the world and introducing you to these
Yeah.
things, setting it up. Like,
World building is done so well in Fellowship. It's
Mhm.
really good.
yeah. So I think I'm Fellowship.
Very good. Adam, if you had to choose.
I think it's Return of the King. Even with that one scene I talked about earlier, I think it's Return of the King. I think the rest of the movie is just so well done, and it's one of the best conclusions to a trilogy ever.
Yeah.
Without reservation there, I think. Even on a Star Wars podcast here, I don't have any qualms in saying that. I actually don't have any qualms in saying that I think Lord of the Rings is my favorite film trilogy of all time. To be totally honest with you, but for the one movie, I think it's Return of the King.
Yeah, and I mean, Return of the King won, I think, like 12 Oscars, possibly. It was a film that is renowned and well deserved. I think, Adam, I'm with you. This is almost a perfect trilogy. I think it's one of the best trilogies out there. The quality is they were filmed at the same time, so it all feels like it fits together. It doesn't feel like there's some of those gaps when you have a trilogy that's filmed separately and everything. Like it was all filmed around the same time, and it just feels like it's one story and it's one connected thing, but that's just split up into 3 parts. For me, I always want to go with the Two Towers. I love middle chapters. I love how it kind of raises the stakes, and you get those kind of moments, almost those cliffhanger moments at the end before it gets into the conclusion. So I guess I'm going to have to go Two Towers, but I love them all so much, so it's really hard to decide. Yeah.
Hey Josh, there's a question from Luke in chat, and I think you'd probably be the best one to talk about this.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've seen it yet, but have you seen the changes to the color gradings in the 4K versions?
Yeah, I looked on YouTube at first before I got the trilogy in 4K, and I was looking at the comparisons, and I almost preferred the original versus like the 4K remaster or whatever they were doing with the colors. But now that I'm just watching them on their own, I think they look beautiful. And I'm not seeing that side by side comparison, so I'm just watching what is being presented to me, and I think they look great.
And they look normal to me.
Yeah,
I didn't even know that was a
So
thing.
we're talking about like the color temperature changes that they've done.
Yeah, like what's the deal?
Yeah, different color changes and things like that.
Okay.
So yeah.
So are they lessened in the 4K, or are they totally gone?
What do you mean?
So like the color shadings, is it just straight normal color, or is it just that they eased up on the grading, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think they wanted to make it look like, I was watching the
Luke says there's no blue tint to Two Towers.
right. Yeah, I think it gives it a more like maybe natural look and
Okay.
a more realistic look. I think they were trying to also make it more seamless between the Hobbit trilogy and the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the look of the films to make it all feel like that. So
Okay.
to my eyes I love how it looks, but when I was doing the side by side comparison, I wasn't as sure about it at first. So, yeah. But yeah, I think it does look a little more natural. But yeah, it's a great question. So, but yeah, and We had another question in the chat about how excited is everyone for the Second Age show we're going to get on Amazon Prime. So yeah, there's more Lord of the Rings coming. I don't know when exactly, but I'm definitely excited to see more from Middle Earth.
Yeah, I was typing my answer in chat, but I'll just say it here.
Mhm.
I'm excited for it, and it also depends on everything that Amazon wants to do to that show. So I'm reserving judgment for at the moment.
That's fair.
I'm interested to see what I'm interested in the time period. I think the Second Age stuff, before the Third Age. I think that's a really good idea, but I'm kind of waiting to see what all Amazon puts in it.
The Second Age is like before this all happened.
Yeah, yeah.
Like even before The Hobbit, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Because I think Galadriel says like something at the beginning about the Second Age of Man when she's telling us about Saruman at the beginning, or Sauron. Why are they so similar?
Yeah, they're similar names.
That's annoying. Sorry.
So what I wanted to end with here was just talking about how the Fellowship of the Ring came out like 20 years ago, which makes me feel really old, first of all, and it's just wild to think about. But what are your thoughts on like how these films have stood the test of time, and what the legacy of these films are, really? And I know Natalie and Michelle, you guys are kind of new to Lord of the Rings, so maybe you don't have a comment on the legacy, but just how it stands up and it stood the test of time. So let's start with Michelle and Natalie on this one.
Well, I will say, even being new to it, I quickly could kind of see how this is a timeless story and
Yes.
why it stood the test of time and why it will continue to be told and continue to be watched and enjoyed by new audiences.
Yeah, I think, being set when it is, it helps it to be able to be timeless. But then the story Tolkien told of good versus evil and
temptation,
yes,
the battle within ourselves sometimes. There's so
friendships.
many themes, that I think just stand the test of time.
Yes, so I think just the story that he did will stand the test of time and will continue 20 years down the road. There will be people who still really appreciate these movies and the story that was told. So I think it's pretty timeless.
Yeah.
Adam,
what do you think?
I mean, I think that the effects have held up incredibly well. Like I said, we started this. They started filming in the really like late 90s for this.
Late 90s, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have held up better than what happened with Star Wars, to be honest. It looks, watching these back on just on Blu-ray. I don't have the 4K editions, but it's held up perfectly fine for me. And what Natalie and Michelle said, this is a timeless story. The story resonated with, people going to see these movies 50 some years after they were first published, and started a craze all over again. Kind of like how the books really gained in popularity between the 60s and 70s. These movies really gained in popularity after 2000. It was like, I don't think these stories are going anywhere anytime soon, and I think they'll be around for a long time. This is, Lord of the Rings is like the epitome of fantasy drama, fantasy action and adventure, and I don't think this story is going anywhere.
Yeah, I agree, and it's exciting to think that we get to go back into Middle Earth, and I love the fact that these franchises are being built. We got the Marvel, we have Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, even too. Like, these franchises have been created to keep creating content in these worlds, and I'm excited to go back to that. And I think the advantage that this trilogy has and why it has stood the test of time and probably will continue to, or I think there are a few decisions they made. Obviously, shooting on location in New Zealand, not relying a lot on visual effects. It feels more grounded, it feels more gritty and more real. And just the decision to film all of them around the same time, and for it to be kind of this seamless thing. I think all those things are in its favor for sure. And also just going back to just the kind of timeless storytelling, good versus evil, like Michelle and Natalie mentioned. So Brittany, any final thoughts on Lord of the Rings trilogy?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. It's like the basic concept, like they have basic concepts and basic themes that he's woven throughout to fit his story. But I mean, we've also related them like we relate to them 20 years from now, and we just related them to our life 20 years later.
Yeah.
You know?
And one thing I want to say here, this is why, like, Tolkien is famous for disliking allegory, which, you know, basically basing his story on something else, and he was more a fan of what he called applicability, I think is how you would say that. And that's what we're talking about right here, is that these themes that he's written about, you know, people love to say, well, Lord of the Rings is based on, you know, World War II or something like that, you know, Nazis taking over Europe and that type of thing. And while I think that those ideas may have inspired some of what he wrote, that's not really what he was trying for. He was going for more universal themes and universal concepts, and that's why we can keep applying these to our everyday life, no matter what the time is. You know, we can find stuff that fits now. We can find stuff that fit 50 years ago. It's always, so far, it's always applicable for us. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and before we go today, I did want to mention our giveaway. Actually, I have the Amazon exclusive Han Solo with Tauntaun Funko Pop right here. It's kind of hard to see because of the lighting, but I'll try to. Yeah, yeah. I don't think it'll smell as bad as the real Tauntaun would, but
Not
yeah,
until you open it.
Right. I have not opened it. I will
smells
not
bad
open
on the inside.
Good point.
Little surprise.
So yeah, so our goal again is on Twitter to get to 1,000 followers. We were as of this morning at 991, and I'd love to give this thing out to someone that joined us today in the live stream. You know, that left a comment. And Adam, we're able to see everybody that joined us and everything, right? So we'll be giving that out to one of you guys because we really appreciate you joining us today, taking time out of your day to join us for this Lord of the Rings discussion. And you know, as soon as we hit 1,000 followers on Twitter, we will be giving that out and sending it your way. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. I love this conversation. Love the chance to talk about Lord of the Rings. It's one of my favorites. And Natalie and Michelle, thank you so much for joining us, and Brittany as well. And Natalie and Michelle, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. We're Force of Light Entertainment. We cover all things, all movies. Well, movies we go see and stuff like that. New movies when we get new movies to cover.
I think, as we said from the beginning, anything that excites us.
Yeah, anything that excites us, anything that intrigues us enough to go watch. But yeah, you can find us at Force of Light Entertainment on YouTube. Also, all places podcasts are. And then also on, Twitter and Instagram at Force of Light Entertainment.
And I want to say thank you for having us back. It's been too long.
I know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful to be with the lovely Brittany.
Yes.
Yes, it's good to see you guys. We'll love to do this again when you guys watch the Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
There you go.
We're gonna do, those of you in the chat, we are going to get to the Hobbit and continue our first watch series with the Hobbit soon.
Yes.
Awesome.
Sounds
Look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll do this
And,
again then.
Brittany, can you tell everybody about the Bosh blog?
Yeah. So it's like my little, I don't know, outlet for my creativity and my bullet journaling mostly, but I also put some fun, like we'll do some book reviews or some show reviews or movie reviews or whatnot. And it's at, I don't do Twitter a lot, so sorry about that. But I have a
But
YouTube
you are on Twitter.
You're probably happier that way.
I am on Twitter. It's just so many places to do my bullet journal stuff on Twitter. So I'm mostly on Instagram, at the Bosh blog, and on YouTube I have a YouTube. You can search it for the Bosh blog, and Facebook and website, theboshblog.com.
Awesome. So thank you guys again so much for joining us. Looking forward to doing it again. Yeah, and I was about to say, may the force be with you, but you know.
Hey, why not?
May the force be with you.
It always applies.
Yeah.